In my last video, I talked about Disney Hercules, which I recently watched for the first time, and which I said, based on the original myth, I can't see how it could make a good kids movie, like one that's accurate to the myth and also appropriate for kids. I said in that video that I thought there were other myths that would be much easier to make child-friendly, and that's what I'm going to talk about right here. So before we get started, there were a few criteria that I used. First of all, it had to be a story somewhat similar to Hercules in terms of following a hero on their adventures, not being primarily a myth to explain something like the seasons change because of Persephone or volcanoes erupt because of Hephaestus. Not a very short story that doesn't really have a lot of complexity or substance, like King Midas wanted to turn everything into gold, but then he thought better of it once he saw what that meant. Something that would be like a story, a narrative, following a hero along a dangerous kind of quest or journey. I also wanted stories that would focus more on human characters than on gods and goddesses. While I definitely think that it would be possible to make an interesting movie about a Greek god or goddess, that's not really the point here. Hercules is a story about a human hero, so I'm looking for things that are similar along those same lines. And then finally, I was looking for stories that would be relatively tame by mythological standards. Now, there are still some things that are not child-friendly and would need to be changed or toned down in these stories. However, I wanted stories that would be easier to do that with without changing large parts of what the story is even about. Here are 3 stories from Greek mythology that I think would be easier to turn into kids' movies than Hercules. The first one is the story of Perseus, which I think is the most logical and obvious choice. Perseus was a young hero who, in order to protect his mother, ended up being manipulated into going on this wild goose chase that was really not meant to end well for him. He was told to bring back the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Medusa is a gorgon who has snakes for hair and turns you to stone by looking at you. Now, the scene where he decapitates her and then uses her decapitated head multiple times to turn other people or things into stone, that is a little bit, questionable as far as whether you could make that child-friendly, but I think if you made her less human and more monstrous, and if you cut down on the gore aspect of it, don't show anything graphic as far as the cutting off the head thing. I remember reading, kids' versions of these myths as a kid and not really being all that disturbed by the idea of Medusa's severed head. Much like Hercules, Perseus was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman. However, Hera doesn't play a huge role in the story, and to be honest, neither does Zeus. So all we really have to say is we don't know who his father is, if you want to take that part out of it and not imply that the king of the gods was unfaithful to his wife. Which, I mean, that's just a standard part of Greek mythology that shows up, pretty much everywhere, but, I get not wanting to imply that in a kid's movie. And then by the end, when he's revealed to be the heir to the throne, that's through his mother's side. So, again, we can just say we don't know who the father was, but the mother was a long-lost princess. That's basically true. Not entirely, not the whole truth, but it's basically true. The main thing that I think would need to be done to the story of Perseus is to give Andromeda a personality. She's his love interest, but she's basically just a damsel in distress. She's chained to a rock to be sacrificed to a sea monster. He sees her and falls in love with her, and so he wants to save her. He petrifies the monster with Medusa's head, and then the two of them get married. And she doesn't really do anything all that interesting. She's basically just there to be in danger so that he can save her from the monster. So I think in order to make this a good kids' movie in the present day, you would need to give her a personality, something to do, some kind of contribution to the story other than just being a damsel in distress. But for the most part, this is a pretty tame and optimistic story as Greek myths go, so I think it would definitely have made a more logical choice than Hercules. The second story on my list is the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. Now, I have feelings about Theseus. I do not like Theseus. You may have seen, my other videos where I've talked about not liking Theseus. I can't forgive him for abandoning Ariadne. But we can tell a version of the story where he doesn't. All of the early part, the part where he's a prince who's volunteering for the tribute that his people have to pay to King Minos, young men and women to be sent into the labyrinth to be fed to the Minotaur because he wants to spare someone else and he believes that he can kill the monster and put an end to the tribute. Him and Ariadne falling in love, even though she's the daughter of King Minos, who's his enemy. Her helping him to escape from the labyrinth alive. the two of them sailing off into the distance together, heading for his kingdom. Just leave out the part where he leaves her on the island and have him remember to change the color of the sails so that his father will know that he's alive. That's all you have to do. This one works so well as a child-friendly myth. All you have to do is change the ending. The third one on my list is kind of a stretch, but I think you could make it work. Jason and the Argonauts. Much like Perseus, Jason is sent on a quest that the people who sent him on it really don't expect him to succeed at. He is sent to find and bring back the Golden Fleece. He goes out on a ship called the Argo with a group of people called the Argonauts, who are like the most famous and acclaimed heroes of the time, and Hercules is actually one of them. Although it's not really Hercules' story, and there are a lot of other people around as well. I think that in order to do this well in an 1.5 to 2 hour movie, definitely you wouldn't be able to go too deeply into the personalities and backstories of all of the Argonauts, but highlighting a few, like Hercules for instance, would work really well. As far as the journey goes, definitely the island of Lemnos would need to be cut. That's the one where they find a group of all women because they killed all the men. Obviously, we don't want to get into that in a movie made for kids, but that would be easy to cut out because that's just one incident that doesn't really have any bearing on the rest of the plot. Depending on how they're depicted, many of the adventures that the Argonauts have actually could be made child-friendly. Like the thing with King Phineas and the Harpies, for instance, just go with the version where they chase them away instead of killing them. And the clashing rocks, that's, dangerous and edge of your seat. Are they gonna make it? But it's not really, there's nothing about it that's, super inappropriate for kids or anything. When they finally find the Golden Fleece, they meet Medea, who's the daughter of the king who has the Golden Fleece in his possession, and she falls in love with Jason and tells him how to complete her father's impossible tasks in order to obtain it. If you cut out literally everything else that we know about Medea, that could actually work as, the romance for the story. Just when they're leaving, we have to cut the part where she kills her own brother so that they can make their escape. And when they arrive back home, we have to cut everything that she does after that. In fact, just end the story with them arriving with the Golden Fleece. End it right there. Definitely there's a little bit more of a challenge here to make the story child-friendly than there is with something like Theseus or Perseus, but it still works much better than Hercules. With Hercules, you can't even tell the same story, really. So, why Hercules, then? I wonder, was it just because name recognition and because Hercules is, a popular and well-known myth? I don't think that Perseus or Theseus or, let alone Jason would have quite the same ring to it as a title for a movie. And everybody's heard of Hercules, so I can see why it would have appealed as, something to make a Disney movie out of. But my goodness, it's just so far removed from what the original myth was even about, and there are others where much less would have had to be changed. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday.